Welcome to week 1 of the 2020 Minnesota Vikings season. The roster has been set. At least the first unofficial depth chart has been set. The starting offensive line has been set. And I've said this for a while that before I make my record prediction, I need to know what the starting offensive line is. We know what it is. Damn it, we're going to do the record prediction on today's podcast. The starting O-line from left to right is as follows. Riley Reiff, left tackle. Dakota Dozier at left guard. Garrett Bradbury will remain at center. Pat Elflein is switching from left guard to right guard, and Brian O'Neill will remain at right tackle. And so I think much like the 2019 Vikings O-line, more of the same in 2020 outside of Brian O'Neill anyway. He's a special case. I think the offensive line, the value in it is more geared towards run blocking than pass blocking. That is unless Dakota Dozier really steps up his game in pass protection, because if he doesn't, honestly, I think we're looking at a duplicate of Pat Elflein. And speaking of Pat Elflein, he has to at least be somewhat aware of the outside noise regarding his play in 2019. Hopefully this dude had a come to Jesus moment with himself, because he's in the final year of his rookie deal. This may very well be his last chance to remain as a starter on the Minnesota Vikings. And hopefully this offseason, if Garrett Bradbury has improved on his upper body strength, then you may have something here with the offensive line, much more than run blocking, maybe even an average pass protecting offensive line. The problem is that's a whole lot of ifs. With that said, we are going to do the game-by-game record prediction for your 2020 Minnesota Vikings that is subject to change on a week-to-week basis based on new information, damn it. Let's get started. Vikings versus Packers, week 1 at US Bank Stadium. Now, in 2019, the first year of the Matt LaFleur era for Green Bay, the Vikings got swept. I think this time around, the Vikings are going to split the series 1-1. I'll break it down more in Thursday's podcast, the Vikings versus Packers preview, but not a lot of help for Aaron Rodgers in the passing game outside of Devontae Adams. We've got a lot more juice in the secondary this time around. If you can slow down Aaron Jones and the run game, and if we can get Dalvin Cook going with this offensive line more equipped in run blocking, listen, man, the Vikings, they're going up against their all-time rival. They're going to be extra jacked up. It's week 1 of the season. I think the Vikings are going to upset the Packers here. They're going to go 1-0. We now go to week 2. Vikings at Colts. Phillip Rivers, he's the quarterback now. He's new sheriff in town. Super erratic. He's a chucker of the football. I think Danielle Hunter and Yannick Ngakoue will make life very difficult for Phillip Rivers. Couple of picks in the secondary to set up nice field position for the Vikings offense. Xavier Rhodes, he'll give up like 2 touchdowns and then raise his hands up in the air and blame his teammates. Vikings will win. They'll move to 2-0. We now go to week 3. Vikings versus Titans. Man, listen. The Titans go super hard in their run game. They just drafted Isaiah Wilson to add to their offensive line. They're going to smack the trenches with Derrick Henry, which is really like trying to tackle Shaquille O'Neal, for God's sakes. If Michael Pierce had not opted out of the season, I would say the Vikings have a chance. You need beef in the middle on the defensive line going up against this team. However, with Shamar Stephen and Jaleel Johnson, I like Jaleel Johnson. However, it's more so extra lean beef. I think it's going to be too much for our D-line to handle. They're going to chew up clock. They just added Jadeveon Clowney to their defensive line as well. I think the Vikings fall to the Titans. They go to 2-1. Vikings at Texans. Deshaun Watson, he's fantastic. However, he no longer has DeAndre Hopkins to work with. He now has the ghost of David Johnson's past. Will Fuller, when healthy, is easily a top 25 wideout. The problem is he's never healthy. Speaking of never healthy, J.J. Watt, when he's on the field, he can be disruptive. They did add Brandon Cooks to the mix of their receiving core, which I think is kind of interesting. I love the fact that they took Ross Blacklock in the draft, who I loved coming out of TCU. I wish the Vikings had taken him. However, I think the Texans have too much to overcome. Last year in 2019, they gave up the 5th most yards allowed, 4th worst in passing. They gave up over 120 yards rushing. I think Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook, they're going to lead the charge. Vikings win. They go to 3-1. Next, we've got Vikings at Seattle. When the fuck will the Seahawks ever have to travel to Minnesota? It seems like the past however many years now, every single time that the Vikings play the Seahawks, it's at Seattle, at Seattle, at Seattle. How is that fair? Either way, all that aside, Russell Wilson, he always gives us problems. I think it's going to be more of the same. Vikings, I see them losing this game on Sunday night. They take the loss. They go down to 3-2. Next, we've got Vikings versus the Falcons. Normally, I would just brush this off and be like, it's the Falcons, who cares? But however, the Falcons have had a sneaky good offseason in terms of upgrades. Todd Gurley, if healthy, he could be a problem. They also signed Dante Fowler Jr., who is really going to take their pass rush to a higher level. Last year in 2019 with the Rams, Dante Fowler had 11.5 sacks, 16 TFLs, and 16 quarterback hits. Grady Jarrett versus Dakota Dozier, that could be, not even could be, I think that's going to be more of a matchup nightmare. And don't look now, folks, but if you remember, those that have been following this podcast for a while, when I did a couple of mock drafts, the cornerback that I was all over that I said, oh, I hope the Vikings get this dude, was A.J. Terrell out of Clemson. And a couple of y'all dudes were like, oh, that's a reach. You don't get him in the first round. Why would you do that? That would be so stupid. A.J. Terrell has been fantastic in training camp. And we're talking about he's going up against dudes like Julio Jones in practice. He has been legit, and he has been named a starter, at least based on the Falcons' first unofficial depth chart. A.J. Terrell has been lights out. So if the Falcons shut down Dalvin Cook and force the Vikings to go into a high-octane offense with this offensive line who has question marks in pass protection, this could be a rough day. I think Dalvin Cook, I think he'll get over 100 yards. I think they do enough to get the win, even though the Falcons, they're nothing to sneeze at this year. You can't brush them off this time around. Vikings, they get the win. They move to 4-2. Vikings at Packers. As mentioned earlier, the Vikings, I think they're going to split this series. They win week 1. I think they're going to lose this time around. The Packers, they're still going to be one of the teams to beat in the NFC. They went to the NFC Championship game last year. Aaron Jones, maybe he gets over 100 yards. The Smith Bros, they get a couple of sacks, maybe even a sack fumble on Kirk Cousins. The Vikings, they fall to 4-3. Vikings versus Lions. Listen, just like the Atlanta Falcons, the Lions had themselves a pretty nice offseason. I can't even front, folks. They traded away Darius Slay to Philly and replaced him by drafting Jeff Okudah in the first round. They also took DeAndre Swift in the second round out of Georgia. Pair him with Kerryon Johnson and most recently signed Adrian Peterson, who's making his return to the NFC North Division. And the Lions, they have themselves a pretty interesting running back by committee. They strengthened their offensive line by adding Jonah Jackson through the draft from Ohio State. Last year, they had, in my opinion, the Lions had the worst pass rush in the league in 2019, and they addressed it quite a bit by adding 2 defensive tackles, Nick Williams from the Chicago Bears and Danny Shelton from the New England Patriots. They also added Jamie Collins. Can't forget about Kenny Galladay, Marvin Jones, TJ Hawkinson, Jesse James. They can be dangerous. And Matthew Stafford, before he got hurt last year, he was on his way to having his career best season in terms of efficiency and taking care of the football. Don't sleep on the Lions. With that said, I think the Vikings, I think they're going to sweep the Lions in 2020. Listen, man, this comes down to coaching. In 2 years, Matt Patricia is 9-22-1. Against Mike Zimmer, he's winless. I criticize Mike Zimmer plenty. I don't think anything's going to change in terms of Matt Patricia versus Mike Zimmer. Vikings, they get the win. They go up to 5-3 after week 9. Vikings at Bears. This is Monday Night Football. Now, conversely, Mike Zimmer is winless up against Matt Nagy, and that's regardless of whether we're facing Mitch Trubisky or backup quarterback Chase Daniel. This comes down to toughness. This comes down to the Vikings offensive line versus the Bears defensive front. If you remember last year, in the first meeting between the two teams, 2019, this was also at Soldier Field. The Bears defensive front pretty much smacked the Vikings offensive line all over the place outside of Brian O'Neill. In fact, Brian O'Neill was the only Vikings O-lineman that deserved to walk out of that game, out of Soldier Field, with his head held high. The rest of those dudes were an embarrassment. You have to be down for the fight, because if you're soft and you don't man the fuck up against this team, you will get swept again for the third straight year. Don't do it for me. Do it because it's your job. You want to be a championship contender, you have to get past teams like this. Otherwise, it's going to be more of the same. I'll believe it when I see it. Vikings fall to 5-4 after week 10. Vikings versus Dallas. Now, last year, the meeting between the two teams, the Vikings, they went down to Arlington at AT&T Stadium to play the Cowboys. The Vikings won in a back-and-forth thriller by 4 points, final score of 28-24. Dalvin Cook, he led in both rushing and receiving for the Minnesota Vikings. I like the addition of CeeDee Lamb out of the draft for the Dallas Cowboys. I also like the signing of Everson Griffin to pair with DeMarcus Lawrence. Speaking of DeMarcus Lawrence, that matchup versus Brian O'Neill, I feel pretty good about it. I'm a little bit shaky about Everson Griffin versus Riley Reif this time around. So I think this will be a close game. I think Zeke Elliott is going to get his. So will Dalvin Cook. I think this will come down to Kirk Cousins versus Dak Prescott, even though Dak Prescott has the much better offensive line. I think in terms of just throwing the football, Kirk Cousins is a much better quarterback. To counteract the much better offensive line that Dak has, I think you're going to need to alternate with blitz packages between Anthony Harris on some downs and Hitman on some other downs. That way you give yourself a chance to put some pressure on Dak Prescott. Adam Thielen, I think he's going to get over 100 yards in this game. Vikings, I think they're going to get the win for the second year in a row. They move to 6-4. Vikings versus Carolina. This is going to be, at least for Teddy Bridgewater and Stephen Weatherly, in their eyes, they're going to look at this game versus the Vikings as a revenge game. Christian McCaffrey, I think he's going to make life a little bit miserable for our linebackers. I love Eric Kendricks, but that speed of Christian McCaffrey, if he gets space, I don't think Eric Kendricks can keep up with him. So that's why this has to be a game of containment. Don't over pursue with the defensive ends of Danielle Hunter and Yannick Ngakoue. Just do just enough to create pressure, but keep your zones clear, so that way if Christian McCaffrey, if he gets a screen pass, he gets the outlet, you have a chance to make a play. And even if you don't, you can slow him down enough for the linebackers to finish the plays off. But here's the caveat, or really here's the problem. If the Vikings defense is so locked in on Christian McCaffrey, this can be a trap game, because if the defense is so focused on Christian McCaffrey, you're going to give up nonstop aerial assaults to DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. They're just big plays waiting to happen. I think Mike Zimmer will have this defense disciplined up against this Carolina Panthers team. I think the run game is going to be solid for the Vikings. Play action, Irv Smith coming out party. Vikings, they get the win. They move to 7-4. Vikings versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. This team appears to be tanking for Trevor Lawrence. They're just basically trading away any and everybody that they can. Gardner Minshew, I'm not going to waste my time. Vikings easily get the win. They move to 8-4. Vikings at Bucks. The Bucks, they just have too many weapons on offense, I think, for the Vikings to keep up with. I think they're going to force the Vikings to get out of their comfort zone where they just want to pound the rock and rely on defense and keep it close. I think they're going to force the Vikings to go high-octane offense versus high-octane offense, i.e. the 2018 game, Kirk Cousins' first year as a Minnesota Vikings versus the LA Rams. I think it's going to be more of the same like that. And I think the Vikings will ultimately fall just because they have too much talent on that roster. And I don't think the Vikings should feel bad. If they win this game, oh, that's going to be an upset. I think that will boost their confidence for the rest of the season. And if they make the playoffs, that will be good to get this win. But even if they lose, I don't think they should feel bad. I have the Bucks versus the Chiefs in this year's Super Bowl. So if you lose, which I do think, you shouldn't feel bad. They'll go down to 8-5. Vikings versus Bears. Like I said earlier, I think the Vikings will get swept by Chicago for the third year in a row unless the Vikings offensive line mans the fuck up. Just get it done. Otherwise, if you don't, you fall to 8-6 after week 15. Vikings at Saints. This is on Christmas Day. In addition to the presents you get under the Christmas tree, Vikings fans will get an additional gift with a win over the Saints. Mike Zimmer is the certified Saints stopper. I do like the addition for New Orleans of Emmanuel Sanders, but it doesn't matter. Vikings will win. Saints will cry me a bayou. Vikings move to 9-6. Lastly, week 17. Vikings at Lions. At this point, the Lions have nothing to play for, and even if they did, as mentioned before, I have the Vikings sweeping the Lions this year, which means the Vikings, my official record prediction for your 2020 Minnesota Vikings, is 10-6. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Now that the regular season is here, we're no longer just doing this once a week. We're going to do this multiple times a week. The next podcast will be on Thursday, Vikings versus Packers preview. And then next week, we're going to move to 3 times a week. Mediocre Best Sports Podcast with Realistic Randy. Check me out on Twitter at realistic_Randy, Facebook at realistic Randy. We'll see you Thursday.